Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Using Data to Create a Killer Business Story for Your C-Suite, hosted by Optmyzr and Hanapin Marketing. Joining us today is Frederick Vallaeys. He's the founder of Optmyzr. He's a PPC hero blogger, and he can be found on Twitter at Silicon Vallaeys. Fred, welcome back. I'm glad to be presenting with you again.
Yes, great to be here again, Jeff, and to be presenting with you. I think we have a fun topic lined up, so can't wait to do it.
Yep, looking forward to it. And my name is Jeff Baum. I'm the Director of Services at Hanapin Marketing. I'm also a blogger for PPC Hero, and I can be found on Twitter as well at JeffBaum71. And we would love for you in the audience to join in on the conversation today. If you're sending us any tweets, just include the hashtag ThinkPPC or use the webinar question box to send off any questions you might have to us. So now for a little bit of about Hanapin and who we are. We run the world's most popular PPC blog, PPC Hero, and the largest PPC conference, HeroConf. This coming April, we'll be in Los Angeles for the conference. We hope to see you there, and you can find out more about us at www.heroconf.com. Hanapin Marketing, we're a industry-leading digital marketing agency that manages clients' paid search, social, and display programs. And just a fun fact about us, our first and second clients are still with us 12 years later, and our clients also see their accounts grow about 250% faster after signing on with us, and about 93% of our partners keep working with us. So that's a little bit about who Hanapin is. And just a roster of some of our clients. We have clients of all shapes and sizes, ranging from the Weather Channel to Burpee Seeds to Highlights and anything and everything in between. So now it's time for our first live poll question. And the question today is, how long have you been in PPC? Less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and 5+ years. And we'll give you a few minutes or a minute or so to answer the question. So Fred, how long have you been involved in PPC?
Well, I bought my first keyword back in, I think it was 1998, when I was at Stanford, out of my dorm room, and I had found some videos really cheap at Blockbuster that were much more expensive if you went to Amazon. And I figured I could sell a ton of these, and I could sell even more if I actually advertised for it. So that's when I got onto goto.com and started doing all of this. And then, of course, in 2002, I joined Google. So that's when I became a hardcore PPC specialist. And Jeff, since your handle on Twitter has got that number 71 in it, does that mean you've been doing it since 71?
It feels like that I've been doing it since 71. That's for sure. I bought my first keyword around the end of 2003, beginning of 2004. So Fred, you've really been around since the beginning of it, but I feel like that I've grown up with it, and it's amazing to see how everything has evolved over the last 12 or 13 years to go just from, click-through rate is your metric to everything that we're talking about now, from shopping to customer match and anything and everything in between, and all the automation. It's really been fun watching the industry grow up.
For the 26% of people there who've been doing this for more than 5 years, you might remember that back in the day there was actually an AdWords before conversion tracking, and that was one of the first projects that I was working on, was figuring out how to bring conversion tracking metrics into AdWords. And it's kind of crazy to think that we just did not know back then how many conversions we were driving with this.
Exactly. And then for the rest of our group that's been here between less than 1 year to 3 to 5 years, you all have an incredible amount of information to work with, and you'll have even more information to work with and more dials to press in the coming months and years. At the rate that paid search and paid social is innovating, it should be really incredible to see where we can take our accounts next. So now we're going to jump into the meat of the presentation, and I'll lead off today. So wanted to talk about how you can frustrate your stakeholders is a way to kick us off to talk about how we can really impress all of our stakeholders through the way that we present data. So the data that I'm going to show in the next couple slides is reflective of actually a story that I'm going to tell that happened earlier on in my career. But earlier on in my career, I worked with somebody who would get onto a client call, and the call went something like this. We would present the weekly report, and we would talk through all the metrics, and we would literally read verbatim off of the report. So it was, this month we had 3,476,601 impressions. We had 93,000, almost 94,000 clicks. We spent $30,000. We had 4,378 web conversions. So that was pretty tough, and it was really tough for our clients to just hear the numbers just being recited and regurgitated. And then for small measure, then we would show the daily details, kind of like what you see in this data set. And to make it more painful, then we would just go through this and say we had 3,000 clicks or 3,059 clicks on the second, and we had 3,348 on the first and 3,409 on the 30th. And it was really tough to listen to. And I had gotten feedback from the client that said, I really love you guys, but I can't be on the phone call with you. You're making me fall asleep. And, that really got me to thinking, really got the person that I was working with, thinking about that. And we really boiled down to why this is frustrating. It's frustrating because there's no context behind the numbers. So it's just random data. What does it mean? The format that it's in, it's not very actionable. And also, there's no knowledge that's being gained out of it. So if data is, you can't put it into context and do something with it, or even if it's not actionable, if you can at least be smarter and at least be a better search marketer because of it, or if you're a client, be able to walk down the hall to your boss's office and sound smart by saying, this is what we learned, then this is not a good format to be presenting your data and your reports to clients. So there is a better way, and the better way to present data is to tell a business story. And why is it important to tell a story? Well, first of all, our brains, just as human beings, are wired for stories. We're emotional creatures, and we use stories to keep people engaged. We also do it to provide additional context and help make those connections. So we use stories to connect with each other. We use context to connect data to the real world and what it all means. And it also reduces complexity. So the one thing we do know about paid search and social accounts, they're enormously complex. There's a ton of data. So how do we reduce that complexity into something that's meaningful that our stakeholders they can connect with and use? So wanted to give an example of what's more compelling. Is this statement more compelling? Last month your account had 1,000 clicks and 10 conversions. Or is it last month we learned that 30% of your conversions were driven by desktop, 70% were driven by mobile. And what we learned from this is that your market is shifting and our strategy needs to shift along with it. So this is how we tell a story, because what it's doing, it's taking the raw data, it's putting it into context, it's explaining to the stakeholders why that there was a change. Why is that desktop and mobile have shifted, and what can we do about it? How do we capitalize on the opportunity? So now that we understand that telling a business story is the best way to connect with our audiences, is to talk about how we actually put the story together. So the first step of telling a story is to actually know your audience. So you could be talking to the C-suite. you could be talking to directors or managers, or you could be talking to everyday people, which could be other specialists. And this is very important because you want to go in with the right data and you want to have the right conversation with the right people. So the way you frame your conversations is going to be based on that. I was recently in a C-suite meeting back in June, and I knew that in order for that meeting to be successful, I was going to have to speak more broadly. I was going to have to speak more about market conditions, where we see the paid search program, next 12 to 18 months. How can we capitalize on just a bunch of different market shifts that are happening. That's a vastly different conversation than other phone calls that I tend to be on, where it's the everyday person, where we're talking about the search query report and how we can best mine it and how we can, turn that into negative matches, or how we use that to find new keywords. So if you have an overly detailed conversation with your C-suite, you can lose them. If you have an overly broad conversation with your specialist, you can lose them. Managers, directors, they kind of straddle that middle world between the C-level and also being, on the ground and in accounts. So you also have to strike a balance there. So they have the detail level insight takeaways along with the bigger ones that they can pass up to their C-suites. The other thing that's important is making an emotional connection when you're in a meeting and you're presenting data. So I felt that this poem from Maya Angelou really explained it, and I never thought that I would get philosophical over paid search because it's so data-driven. But she had written, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So, that's very important, because when you're in a meeting and you're presenting all this data, probably at the end of that meeting, they're not going to remember the details of what they said, but they're going to have a feeling. And the feeling is going to be all about you. Does your contact have confidence in you? Did you present the data in such a way that you feel, or they feel, that you have a grasp on their business, how paid search and social plays into it, and how you're going to win for them? Stakeholders will also develop a feeling whether or not you understand their specific needs. So the way that you present, that if they feel that you're on the same page as them, you're going to create that positive feeling. And then also, do they believe that you have the right solution to their problems? Because although we're PPC nerds and we love getting into it, to the outside world, our job is to solve business problems through the use of paid search and paid social. And if our stakeholders feel that we're solving their problems, then we're creating that great story for them and creating that strong connection where you're building up capital with them, where they're going to continue to want to work with you because they know that you're going to be able to deliver for them. Also, an important thing to understand is how to tell the story. So the people that we work with, that we're presenting to, they have very short attention spans. And we have to tell a business story a little bit different than we would tell a regular story. So if you're reading a book or you're reading an article or watching a movie, you know that the story builds up, and then over time, we reach the most important part of that story, which is that aha moment. So in a book, it'll be the conclusion, or the big action sequence, or when the whole story sort of comes together. When we're dealing with busy executives particularly, they don't have that kind of time to see how it's going to turn out. We have to hit them with the most important takeaway first, so give them the aha moment right away. So when I was in this C-suite meeting, I started off the meeting by saying, if you don't remember anything else about what I'm going to talk about in the next 90 minutes, know that all is well. And then what I did is explain how and why all is well. And I discussed all the data in detail, explaining how we grew, lead volumes grew, and cost per lead got better, and back-end conversion metrics were improving. So they still got the how and why, but they're not going to remember the how and why. Also gave them the key learnings. What did we learn about the industry? What did we learn about the accounts? Did we learn what worked and what didn't, and how we can double down on what we're learning in the industry? And then also next steps, how we're taking what we learned and making it actionable in order to be able to fuel even better results in the future. It's a good chance that nobody remembered that at the end of the meeting, but they knew that everything was okay, and that was the key thing. And even if everything was not okay, at least that they knew why. But it's important to have that aha moment right in the beginning. So now I'm going to talk about a small case study, and this goes back to this meeting that I was in with the executive team of how we presented data. It's not good enough to walk in and just say, this is how many leads we got, this is the CPL that we're getting. It's just not enough context. So what we did here is we split up by their search bucket, their display bucket, and then also their engagement bucket, which would be Yelp and YouTube, and really be able to show, what the results were. So there was a lot of transparency and knowledge of what channels are driving what types of performance. We then showed them what their lead volume would look like. So this, in this case, was an aggregate lead volume, and then you can see outside of February where it grew significantly, the results were a little bit more modest. And there's a reason for that. The data here is including phone leads, it's including web submissions, it's including mobile, it's including desktop. So again, there's limited context here. It still tells the basic story that they grew, but it doesn't tell you the why. But as we go into the next slide, for highlighting purposes, I'm showing the phone leads. And you can see here in 2016, there was quite a bit of growth with phone. So it was important to explain this to the executives that there is an area that's growing significantly. And what this did is it led to a lot of discussions of why. What's changed? Are more people, inclined to call? Is it the shift in the marketplace from desktop to mobile? What is it, and what could we do? So the end result out of all of this was doubling down on click-to-call, increasing our bid modifiers, making sure that our ad copy is more mobile-centric. So there was a great conversation that happened because of this segmented view. And we also had learned, because desktop was essentially flat, that although we need to de-emphasize it a little bit compared to some of the other channels that they were running outside of paid search, that desktop was still important, because if you looked at desktop as a channel versus a sub-device in a sense, that we learned that we still needed to fund it and fuel it. And then to further demonstrate how well phone was doing, we also showed phone transfers. So did the leads transfer to a salesperson, or did they just sort of die with the customer service rep? And transfers are a proxy for lead quality in this scenario. The fact that everything grew significantly, April was a little bit down, but there were some budgeting reasons for that, so all the growth was proportional to the amount of budget. We were also demonstrating that these phone leads are good quality leads, and they're ultimately leading to business. And then we tied that off by showing enrollments. So in this particular case, enrollment was the really key metric. And you can see in February, there was some pretty significant growth. March and April were very strong, and it takes about 3 to 6 months for the full data funnel to develop. So these are results that have happened pretty much right after the fact. And the fact that May was already beating, or it was already growing year over year, was showing that that was going to be a big month, because to already be ahead just 22 days out from the close of the month, we had reported or had this meeting in June, and we were using the end of May data, really showed that phone was really showing exponential growth. So this is the importance of showing segmented data. You have to give your clients or your stakeholders very detailed breakdowns of what's driving performance. And there's a million ways that you can break down performance. You could do brand versus non-brand, device, time of day, attribution, the way your channels play into each other. You're really limited by your imagination, but really the key thing to understand is bring detailed data. Even if they don't remember it, clients and stakeholders are going to remember that you really took the time and effort to really understand what's driving performance, and you're using that to fuel your strategy. So now I'm going to turn it over to Fred, and he's going to talk a little bit about how to pull some really great data and get some great insights.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so that's some great information from you as someone who really talks to the clients on a weekly basis or a relatively frequent basis. Myself, on the other hand, I founded Optmyzr. It's a tool company that makes managing AdWords accounts and PPC accounts much more efficient. And one of the things we do is around reporting. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how we think about visualizations and arming you with the tools that you need to kind of do what Jeff just talked about and putting that into practice. Also, by the way, do ask your questions in the Q&A box or in the questions section so that we can get to those, because we'll definitely have some time left here at the end. So anyway, Jeff gave you some great case studies there. And what I wanted to show here is that you can visualize things different ways and things will tell different stories. So if you click on the next button here, you'll see that what we're visualizing is a pie chart of device performance. And so in blue, you see computers, in orange, you see tablets, in red, you see mobile. And what this sort of a visualization instantly tells me is that the tablet performance, both for cost and conversion value, is significantly lower than the other two devices. And so here you can see that computers for this particular campaign is the biggest. You can also see there's a small discrepancy between how much cost is coming from each device type and how much conversion value is coming from it. So you can see there's slightly more conversion value coming on the blue, 58% versus cost, 54%. So that kind of tells you that computers probably have a better return on ad spend than some of the other device types. But really on the pie chart, what you're visualizing is how much is coming from each of these different devices. If you click on the next one, you'll see that a different visualization of the same data now actually tells you what is the ROAS, or the conversion value divided by cost. And here you can see something quite interesting. You can see that that little slice of orange, which is kind of hard to see on the pie charts, actually there is a significant 30% difference in the ROAS for tablets versus computers. So the point I want to make here is, whatever the story you're trying to tell, making it easy to understand is actually very difficult in many cases. A lot of time will go into figuring out what is the best way to visualize something so that it instantly resonates with that C-level executive or whoever the client is, so that it actually also supports the story that you're telling them, right? So these two things visualize the exact same information, but they kind of highlight a different thing. So if you go to the next page, again, we at Optmyzr here, we have reporting as one of the tools. We also have optimizations. We have data insights. But one of the paradoxes that we see is our clients, they all want to do reporting. They run reports weekly, monthly. There's thousands of reports going through our system, but only 1% of the reports that we have scheduled and automatically send out get opened. So that's kind of crazy, right? All this time is going into generating these reports, but only 1% of these are actually being looked at by the clients. And if you go to the next slide, the one thing that I've learned over my years of both working at Google, then having been a PPC consultant and now running Optmyzr, is that clients are kind of weird when it comes to the types of reports that they need. So every client will say, yes, you must have reports. We want to have a dashboard. But the reality is they don't look at that until they maybe are not so happy with the performance. And then at the moment that they realize they're not happy with the performance, the report that you've always given them no longer is enough. All of a sudden, they want to see every level of detail of data because they figure they've just become the PPC hero who's going to be able to solve all of the problems that exist in the account. So at some level, having these reports, having these dashboards is about giving the client a comfort level that there's something they could go and look at if they wanted to. but in reality, they're not going to look at it until they actually have some deeper questions because there's a level of dissatisfaction. And so obviously your job is going to be to prevent that dissatisfaction, because the moment that they say, okay, give me all the data, okay, now you're in trouble, because now you're going to spend hours upon hours explaining the most granular details, and that's absolutely not where you want to be, because it takes away time from the bigger strategy and all of the other things you're trying to achieve. All right, so let's take a look on the next slide here at a couple of different ways now of visualizing things to hopefully give the client a little bit more of the signal as opposed to just the raw data. Okay, so here you see Google's view of the MCC dashboard. Okay, pretty interesting data. So on the left-hand side, in the left column, you see all the different accounts and then the different stats for each of these. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see Optmyzr's take on the MCC dashboard. So what we said was, clients probably want to know how the account is moving. Okay, so let's put on red and green arrows to show directionality of each of the metrics. But we soon realized that now you just have a jumble of red and green arrows, and the fact that the impressions have gone up, which may be a green arrow, and the cost has gone down, which is also a green arrow, does that really mean anything? Well, by and large, no, it doesn't, because the client really cares about the KPIs like cost per acquisition, number of conversions. So what we decided to do was put a red dot and a green dot next to each account. So this is the leftmost color coding that we have on that report. That shows you kind of what's the combination of all the arrows. Is the account actually moving in the right direction? So if you click on the next slide here, you'll see the detail view. So if you click on one of these dots, we actually bring out what are the 3 or 4 KPIs that really matter to the account and how are those doing against expectation. So this is really important because you can very easily get into data overload, and figuring out how to distill it down to something that really makes sense, that's oftentimes quite challenging. So let's take a look at another visualization here. So on this one, we're going to have performance data. So this is from a number of campaigns across an account. And again, you know, Google has fantastic data. So you can say, okay, clicks are up, impressions are down, blah, blah, blah. But this is a lot of stuff to read, okay? So let's take a look at the next visualization, visual. This is what Optmyzr did. If you click again, next we're gonna zoom in on this. But so what we're trying to tell here is the story of the PPC account. So we know that each one of the metrics is somehow related to the other metrics. There's a correlation and causation between these. So conversions, these are up. Why could conversions be up? Well, conversions are driven by 2 things. They're driven by clicks and conversion rate. So someone clicking onto your landing page and then deciding to convert. Clicks themselves are driven by a few things as well. So you can't get a click until you get an impression and somebody decides to click on it, CTR. And that's partly driven also by your average CPC and position, of course. So what we're able to do here by visualizing things in this way is, rather than presenting you with a massive table of different data points where it's hard to understand what's connected to what, you can literally read this from the top down. And it's basically what Jeff was saying about the aha moment. Okay, the aha moment in this case is the most important metric to the client. Its conversions are up. Okay, why are conversions up? Well, they're up because your conversion rate is much better, and all of that despite the fact that your clicks went down, and the clicks are actually down because the CTR has dropped tremendously. So maybe that's something we can focus on for the next month, is figuring out why the CTR has dropped so much. So this tells you both the aha moment, but also what is the next action you could take to make this an even better story the next time you present it. Okay, let's take a look at the next visualization here. So the other thing that we do, and this is with the same data, is but we were able to break it down to the components of the account that have shifted. Okay, so everything in green is a positive change that's of some sort of significance, either because it's a big absolute number or a big percentage change. And so this is going beyond the metric now. So we're not just looking at conversion rate, CTR, but we're actually saying what portions of the account, or even what device types or what networks have played a significant role in making this account move a certain way. Now, this information here, I will admit, this is probably not what you would present to the C-level suite, but the fact that you could have a report like this, actually you as an account manager, you're now going to save time, you're going to have quicker insights, and you get to devote more time on figuring out what is that bigger story, like Jeff is saying, that you need to present to the executive. Too many PPC account managers get so bogged down in the weeds that they don't have time to come up with that bigger story. And so if they had tools, if they had reports, if they have automations, they can actually get to that point. Right, let's take a look at the next one. So here, we're going to show Geo Data. You can go to the Google Dimensions tab, get lots of geographic performance data for your account. But once again, it's a big table, just doesn't make a lot of sense if you look at it very quickly. If you look at the next slide, what we do is we visualize this on a map. Now, the next version of the Google AdWords interface is actually going to have these types of mapping capabilities. But we've already done this in Optmyzr. So here it's very easy now to say that, okay, Australia, Western Europe, and North America seem to be the most important regions for this account. South America, there's no activity there, okay? So that could be an interesting insight. Now, if you look at the next slide, we take this one step further, and we do some color coding. So here we're color coding the cost per acquisition by different regions. And so the red ones are more expensive than typical, and green is less expensive than typical. And what you can see if you look at Australia right there is that Australia is actually less expensive than average. So that's a good insight. So you could take a look at Australia and try to figure out, is it because it's a less mature market, maybe because the CPCs are lower, or is there actually something we're doing as far as messaging that's really resonating? And for the folks watching this from Europe or watching this later on after the live version from Europe, yes, I do realize that the United States is not typically in the middle of the world. This is just the way that the map was pulled from Google, so apologies for that. Now, if you look at the next one, I'll show you one more visualization. So this is going to be the search query data from Google. And again, great data Google provides, but how do you visualize this to actually see some signal from this? If you look at the next slide, what we're able to do is we build a word cloud. And we distill the entire search query report into individual words, and then we're able to present you with something like this. And this is cool because if you look at the search query report, it could be 10,000 rows of data, and a lot of that stuff towards the end of the report with just a handful of impressions, you might not really pay attention to those. But if you look at the common words between all of these queries, you could actually see that the word AdWords, in this case, represented almost $900 worth of cost. If that is a relevant word, then great. But if you find some words on this list that don't necessarily make a ton of sense, you could actually go and exclude those as negative keywords, or you could run entirely new campaigns if you found that some of these topics are quite interesting and relevant to your business. So if we go to the next slide, let me talk a little bit about how you can get all of these types of reports more quickly and to some degree automatically. So we at Optmyzr, we've built a lot of reports using AdWords scripts. And so AdWords scripts are basically little pieces of JavaScript code that you can copy and paste into your AdWords account, and then from there you can schedule them. So JavaScript, that can be a little bit scary to non-programmers. So if you look at the next slide, the good news is that companies like Optmyzr, websites like Free AdWords Scripts, even Hanapin, we've all published scripts that you can literally just copy and paste. So if you know how to do Control-C and Control-V, you're golden. You're going to be able to start running some of these reports pretty much out of the box. Now, what can some of these scripts do? Let's take a look at that next one. So here we have an example where you would take, and this is on the next slide. So on the next slide, you'll see that AdWords has 44 different reports available. What is presented to us in the AdWords interface is a subset of that. It's a visual representation of the underlying data. Sometimes it's really useful to get to the underlying data because that's where the big trove of all of the data in AdWords lives. We can actually do interesting things with that. So you have these reports in AdWords. If you click next here, you'll see you can use an AdWords script. The AdWords script can automatically download that, stick it into your Google Drive, and then if you have the Google Drive app running on your system, on your local computer, it can actually make sure all those reports get downloaded. So even if you go offline, you'll still have all of this data, and now you can open it into Excel, and from Excel, of course, you can run macros, you can do other things to aggregate the data in interesting ways, or you could use scripts to do that aggregation for you. If you take a look at the next one, here we will have an example of one data set we pulled. So we looked at keyword level data, and we broke it down by different match types, and then we did some aggregation on it. But what's cool here is not only have we presented the client with a table of the performance by match type, but we also automatically visualize it. So here on that bar chart, you can see that as expected, exact match has a much better CTR than broad match. But from here, you could figure out, okay, maybe this broad match for this account is significantly lower than what we typically see in an account. So maybe we need to focus a little bit more on the quality of those broad match keywords. You could also very easily extend this into other interesting areas. So we've done this where we do it by length of the keyword or length of the query. So it basically tells us, is it even worth going into 7, 8, 9-word keywords, or is that going too far, too deep into the tail, where the payoff is potentially not there, where the number of impressions for those keywords is dropping off drastically. And that's actually what we're finding. So if you go much beyond 5-word keywords, those often would have been picked up by broad match anyway, and so the amount of management required to maintain that versus the new impressions that you get is actually quite low. All right, so let's look at the next one here. So with an AdWords script, you can also push some of the data that you generate into a dashboarding solution. There are plenty of dashboarding solutions out there. So one that I like is called Sive.com. Most of these dashboards, they have automatic integrations with AdWords, and so they'll visualize a bunch of stuff for you. But what if you wanted to visualize something like the account level quality score? So that is a calculated metric, and Optmyzr has blogged about how to derive that metric. We have it in our tool, of course, as well. But so you could write a script, or you could copy one of our scripts, and you'll know what the account level quality score is. From there, it's only a few additional steps to push that data into a dashboard solution. And the reason I like these dashboards where you can customize is that if you have a client and you're able to present them with a dashboard that's not completely cookie cutter, but that you've actually customized with something that's a little bit more difficult to get, it's less likely that client will leave you, because if they leave your agency, your management, there is some significant amount of data that they will not automatically get from just the next agency, right? So it's a bigger consideration as far as leaving, and so cost may not play as big of a factor when they realize there's actually a tremendous amount of value that you're driving. Okay, let's look at the next one here. So this is the final one that I want to talk about as far as data presentation. So AdWords has some scripts. This is the account anomaly detector. A fantastic script, tells you very interesting information, but my problem with it is it generates one spreadsheet for each account that you manage. I really don't have time to open up 50 spreadsheets every hour to see how things are going. So if you click next, what you are able to do with a script is you can say, how do we want to aggregate this? And here you can see, instead of having 5 spreadsheets, we have one spreadsheet with one line for each client, and we've been able to color code it to even more quickly draw attention to what's going well and what's not going well. And so this is the power of AdWords script, is you can take something that somebody else has built, but you can customize it even further. You can really hone in on the methodology to present the data the way that you need it to be presented. If you look at the next slide, Google has a really cool tool. It's called the Prediction API, and this is also integrated in AdWords script. Now, oftentimes when Jeff goes into meetings or when I have to present some information, it's really the key point is, what is the main insight that we can draw from something? Well, nowadays there's so much data in AdWords that it may be difficult for us to get an insight where a computer could easily see some sort of a correlation. And this sort of a prediction API, you can just feed it a bunch of data and it'll start to see the correlations and help you predict future things. So we've used it to do query analysis to see which queries should be added as negatives or positive keywords based on the likelihood that in the future they will actually drive conversions. And that's done by looking at a historical record of every query that's done conversions. So when you get a little bit overwhelmed in terms of managing the data, look at systems like the Prediction API to help you with that. All right, so then finally, I want to talk about how do you put this into sort of an automated schedule. And so you can go to AdWords. AdWords has this report builder. At this point, you can actually schedule some of these visualizations. That used to not be the case when Google first came out with these, but now you can automatically build a pivot table, a bar chart, a line chart, a pie chart, and have it delivered to you automatically on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And so this could be great because these are the types of visualizations that if you've really honed in on what they need to say and then kind of tweak them, you can then copy and paste it and put it into a report so you don't have to do that data pull. By the way, great story was actually Jeff Allen, the president of Hanapin. He was giving a presentation, and he'd done some data analysis, and then after 4 hours of pulling reports, he figured that he really needed to segment things slightly differently. And so he couldn't just go back and quickly change that, so he had to spend another 4 hours pulling the fresh data, putting everything together again. And I think the point here with automated reports is once you spend 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours really figuring out what needs to be in a report, put it into a tool like this, because that way the next time you need it, all you need to do is click a button, wait 30 seconds, and the fresh data comes out. And if you want to segment it differently, usually the tool will make that fairly easy to do. And on the left side of the slide, by the way, you see scheduled reports from Optmyzr. And what's cool about these third-party solutions, and not just Optmyzr, but all the third-party solutions outside of Google, is that they can typically pull in data from Facebook, from Bing, from AdWords, from all these different sources, whereas the platforms themselves tend to be pretty restrictive about what you can pull in. So in an AdWords report from Google, you can't really include any data about Facebook. So there is one final solution, and if we go to the next slide here, so that's Google Analytics. They also have schedulable downloads of dashboards. So you can construct a dashboard, and now in this case you can actually include Facebook. You do have to do the cost import, which is a bit of an advanced process. You can include Twitter, you can include all of your data sources, but you can construct a dashboard that you can then share with your clients as a PDF on a somewhat frequent basis. So there are some free solutions like Google AdWords, like Google Analytics, that help with some of this reporting, and they have their advantages, but then obviously there are also advantages to those third-party solutions, and hopefully all of those will save you a bunch of time. So that's a little bit about how we pull the data and how we visualize. So maybe let me throw it back over to Jeff to tell us a few more things about what you would do with this data.
Sure, and Fred, that was great insight. I think it's so important to be able to, automate reports and really figure out your needs beforehand, so you can have deeper insights and deeper learnings and spend less time, pulling data. I think it's time well used when you spend the upfront time because you're thinking about it strategically. But what you're doing is you're eliminating a lot of the grunt work of just pulling the same data over and over and over again. So certainly appreciate that. So what I wanted to talk about is to finish up the section talking about key learnings and how we sort of tie the rest of the story together. So going back to the case study that we were discussing earlier, part of it was to bring some key learnings. And what we did is we focused on budgeting analysis, account performance, and industry. So it's really good to bring a broad base of key learnings. It's very important to know about the industry. So for example, like C-level executives, they want to know, are brand queries up and down, up or down, I should say? How did non-brand do? What segments of their industries are growing in the marketplace, so they know if they're going into a headwind or if they are in multiple markets, they need to shift budget into the markets that have better chances of driving business. We had learned about just the budgeting process and keeping budgets stable, not just on a PPC level, but on a bigger business level, in order to be able to drive more spend through the various channels. Analysis was important. A thing that came directly out of our analysis, we learned that we needed call tracking, and it led to the client purchasing a call tracking solution. And then also learning about, with account performance, that from doing a ton of analysis and just looking at how geos perform, is actually layering geos to understand how do we best perform at 1 to 5 miles or 5 to 10 or greater. So it's very important to provide those key learnings across multiple areas, because you're giving a really broad base understanding of what's happening throughout the account. And then, taking these key learnings, how do we make them effective? So the questions that I ask myself when I'm deriving key learnings from a report or putting together a big presentation is, can it be translated into action? You know, how good is learning for just learning's sake? I mean, if it makes the organization smarter, that's certainly a good learning, but I try to look at it as, if a learning can't be translated into action, if it doesn't inform strategic or tactical decision making, and if it's not making the organization smarter, then it probably doesn't qualify as a key learning. So I would strongly consider, when you're trying to determine what are the key learnings, is to apply this criteria. So this way you're not providing a bunch of fluff, that you're walking in with hard-hitting information that's going to turn into action, that's going to make a better decision, a better recommendation, and ultimately it's going to make you look really great in front of the people that you need to present to. And then finally, explaining next steps. So I've seen too many times where we get 90% of the way there. You know, we present some really good data, we present some really cool learnings, but then we don't say what's going to happen next. And by not doing that, that could definitely lead to frustration, and I've seen it firsthand because I've made that mistake myself earlier on in my career. So you want to definitely tie off any presentation, any client meeting with what the next steps are going to be. So the advice is to derive your next steps directly from your performance and key learnings. So, and particularly that segmented performance. What did we learn in there? What could we do next? Pull it directly from there, so it's coming from something. It's not being pulled out of the blue or thin air. Provide expected outcomes. Now, this is something that I know scares a lot of people, because we misinterpret that as predictions. And we all know that once we give predictions, then we feel like we're a little boxed in, that we're telling people what performance is going to be. And we all know the consequences if we don't reach those performance targets. But we do have to provide some sort of guidance. And I try to handle expected outcomes by saying, you know, this is what we're seeing. This is baseline performance. If a bunch of things were to go right, this is what we can minimally expect to have happen should things go according to plan. So you're qualifying how you're presenting those outcomes, and you're setting those expectations, and then provide preliminary timelines for completion. So, you know, you have a bunch of great initiatives that you want to work on. Clients are going to want to know more when they're going to launch and when they can expect to see the results. So make sure that you're presenting those preliminary timelines. So that's it for the content portion of today. So for attending our webinar today, you have access to a couple of offers. So one offer is a free trial of Optmyzr. Another offer is you can get an account analysis from Hanapin. So if you're spending more than $15,000 a month, we can do something called the Solutions Blueprint, where one of the experts on the Hanapin team will take a look at your account. We'll look at things like account structure, or we'll look at ad copy or your keyword bidding strategy and tactics, and offer recommendations. We'll tell you what seems to be working well, where we think that there's opportunity, and how you can capitalize on it. Or you can get both offers. So it's a real benefit for being on the webinar today. So hopefully you'll take advantage of it.
Great. And with that,
yeah.
So click the button that interests you, and let's see some of the questions here. So one question that came in for me was about the performance story. So those little boxes with arrows between them showing the correlation between conversions and clicks and conversion rate, for example. If that's available somewhere in Optmyzr, and what it is called. So yes, it is available. That's called the PPC Investigator. It is one of our data insight tools. So go to the Data Insights tab, and then it's the last tool on that list. It's the PPC Investigator. So actually, all of the visualizations that I showed are available in the Optmyzr tool, and they're all part of Data Insights. So they're available at any level of subscription. So if you can't find it, definitely reach out to me or the support team, and we can help you get going with those. All right, so let's see, there's a question for Jeff. So Jeff, they're asking what you think about the frequency of reporting. Is there a time when you're just doing too much of it? Should it be weekly, monthly, sometimes even daily?
Mm-hmm. I tend to feel that when you create a weekly report, it's too much. If in the framework you're just talking about what happened in the last 7 days, because what happens is you get into the cycle of what happened the last 7 days and what are you going to do in the next 7 days, and that doesn't tell you the big story of what's going on. I also feel the same way about daily reporting if you're talking about it in the framework of what happened yesterday and what are you going to do tomorrow. If you're using daily report just as a tracking tool and it's building up your monthly report and you can keep tabs on what's happening and you can look for in-month trends if you have to adjust, and even on the weekly level, that's definitely, it has some value. What I find has the most value, even if you're creating a report weekly, if it's showing how your month is trending and how it's shaping up, I think that that's a more important conversation. And then also pulling data from, larger date ranges and talking about them maybe once a month, looking back at how the last 3 months or so have progressed, because I think then you're really starting to measure against your overall strategy and really understanding if you have the right plan in place and whether you need to adjust it. So if in a perfect world, I would love to get rid of the weekly reports, the daily reports, and most importantly, talking about that daily and that weekly conversation, have bigger conversations. That's where I would lean towards with reporting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think put it in context of the bigger picture, which is a longer date range, also showing year-over-year seasonality, because obviously the week of Black Friday, well, that's going to be a little bit of a strange week compared to the week before it for most advertisers. And then the other thing, as you go to more frequent reporting, you just hit some limitations of the systems like AdWords and Google Analytics in terms of conversion reporting. So I've seen large accounts where it takes literally 3 days for a conversion to move over from GA, Google Analytics, to AdWords. And if you're doing weekly reporting, well then, by default, you're sort of reporting on half of the data being incorrect. And so I had a very specific situation where every time I spoke with a client every week, and he was always upset because the conversions always looked like they were way down. And I was like, well, but remember last week was the same thing. And then when we gave it a few more days, the data actually arrived and things were good. So those are some of the considerations that you get into, and just be careful with those. So another question here. What have you found to be the most interesting sort of tidbits of data that executives and upper management like to see and are interested in?
I would say that, from a C-level perspective, they want to, if you're talking about e-commerce, it's revenue, return on ad spend, and they usually want to know how that's performing year over year. When you're talking about lead generation, they want to know the end result. It's important to them to know how much lead volume they're getting, and they definitely want to know that. But what they really want to know is, did they become customers? So that when you're talking to the C-level, they're really concerned with their business metrics. They don't have a lot of interest in things like click-through rate or even conversion rate. They're more of, did I bring more total dollars in? And the most important thing they want to know is what are you going to do with the data? So you have all this great information. What's the next move? A lot of executives look at it like it's a big chess game. So you've made your move, you got this result. What's the next move that's going to happen that's going to take us to the next spot?
Yeah, and another important component of that, it being a chess game, is what is your opponent doing? So I think the auction insights reports are very interesting to executives because they basically show you which competitors have gotten more aggressive, which ones are maybe falling off, and then trying to understand why is it that some of those are getting more aggressive. Are they taking advantage of new features that we don't have access to? Is it time to talk to our Google rep to get into some new betas that are driving this additional capability? So I think that's always very interesting to executives.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Competitors, competition, that's always a big thing. And, anything that you could do to show that story nice and cleanly and know which competitors are disrupting the marketplace or disrupting, your business and showing a solution for that's pretty powerful.
Great. Another question, how would you demonstrate foot traffic to the C-suite on a report, not for an e-commerce type client?
Showing foot traffic. Boy, that's a tough one, and I have to be honest, I really don't have an answer for that. I don't know, but I could research it and get back. Fred, do you have any insights or experience with that?
I think Google is just starting to build all of that into the reports. Yeah. Of course, if it's not e-commerce, and so maybe you're talking about a lawyer or some other service professional, like obviously there's not going to be that much foot traffic. If you have hourly meetings, that's basically 8 people a day at the most.
Right.
And so Google does require kind of a higher number of data before they start showing it because they don't want to invade privacy. But it is pretty amazing what Google's doing nowadays. I don't know if people have looked at on Google Maps. You can literally open up now a little chart of how busy a place is. And they've had that functionality for about a year where it's historical data, but now you can open it up and for the restaurant you're about to go get lunch at right now, it'll tell you, is it busier than usual based off of actual people with Google Maps in that store, in that location. So Google's getting quite good at having that data, and they're actually doing a decent job of putting it into AdWords. And then I think kind of the underlying question also goes to what's the full value of the PPC efforts that we're doing. So it's obviously not just people buying online, but it's people coming into the store. It's people talking about us on social media, telling their friends, repeat business, right? So the more correctly and fully you can measure the impact of your PPC ads, the more correct your bids can be. And oftentimes that means higher bids, which makes you more competitive. And it goes back to that question about auction insights, right? So maybe one of your competitors is bidding at a level that you think is just ridiculous and not sustainable, but maybe it actually is. Maybe they've just measured things more completely than you have. And so think about what's the real full impact of the online marketing on the real business, and that includes offline transactions as well. Another question here, do you have a page limit on the reports? So do you try to keep it single page, more pages, dashboard, PDF? Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
I don't really keep a page limit, but I try to stay on the first page. I kind of take the approach of, show the data, but the client can read over it. So what I try to do on the first page, that's where I'll have, key insights and takeaways and summarize the data. In fact, on our monthly reports, I look at the first page is the most critical because that's where we actually write the summary. And then all the other data is there for clients to look over. They can, ask questions. If I saw something in the actual data itself that I thought that was really important, I would just call it out on that first page. Because, going back to the earlier example from the beginning of the webinar, it's really tough when you're just reciting data. They can read that. I rather just spend on that first page and say, hey, this is what it all means. But at least all the information is there for the client to feel like they have everything they need.
Yeah, bring the most salient data to the top. And then I think it's also really important to train your clients about what is in the reports and why that's the right level. Another situation you want to avoid is that your first presentation of the report is rather weak, because then the client will all of a sudden start to tell you what needs to be in it. And if the tools that you have don't really support that very easily, now you end up spending a ton of time producing that next report because it's what the client will, just not typically what you produce. And so then you have to ask the question, well, did the client hire me to do reporting or to actually manage the account? And I've seen plenty of situations where it just gets completely flipped upside down. And okay, now the results are starting to go sideways because the account manager is doing reporting as opposed to management, because the client is micromanaging the whole situation. So I think that initial conversation, whether it's a one-page report or a 10-page report, get the client to buy into this is the right level of reporting, and this is what you're going to get on this sort of a frequency. All right.
I agree.
So we're at the top of the hour. So Jeff, any parting thoughts from you?
I just want to say that it was great presenting with you, a lot of great insights, and really just the parting thing is, just make sure you tell a good story to your clients and your stakeholders. I think that, it'll help for professional development, and it will also help you get the resources and tools you need to do your reporting. So with that, I'd like to thank you for attending our webinar. Again, if you want to continue to reach out to us, just reach out to us with the hashtag ThinkPPC on Twitter, or if you want to reach Hanapin Marketing and give us feedback, just email marketing@hanapinmarketing.com, or if you want to reach Optmyzr, just reach out to support@optmyzr.com. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.